everyone, welcome back. This is Dale Anderson. We're in our study, in our course on biblical doctrines of the faith, and we've been focusing in on Jesus' future ministry to return to the earth as his rightful king and judge and bridegroom. And in the last few sessions, we've been focused in on the book of Revelation. And last session, we looked at chapters 6 and 7, that first segment of the storyline, and an explanation as to some of the things that were happening. That first judgment series of chapter 6, the seals, where Jesus breaks the wax seals in order to open the scroll he's been given. And then chapter 7, explaining to us that great question, this is the day of the Lord, who can endure it? Who can stand during this day? And chapter 7 explaining to us it's those who have been sealed, they've been sealed with God's seal. He will protect them and watch over them. Well, we want to go to the next judgment series. We find, if you turn to Revelation chapter 8 and 9, so we're going to look at the next judgment series. And Revelation 8 is the next step in the storyline. Remember, we had the seals, and that was the narrative, and then a pause, chapter 7, and now we're pressing play again and coming back to the narrative of the storyline in Revelation 8 and 9. And so here what happens is, as we open Revelation 8, it tells us this in verse 1. When he opened, meaning Jesus, when he opened the seventh seal. So you'll notice in chapter 6, we didn't get all 7 seals. We got the first 6, and then a great question was asked. Chapter 7 explained to us that question, and now here we come back to chapter 8 with the opening of the 7th seal. Now watch this, don't get confused by it, but it's a little bit of an interesting thing. The 7th seal, Jesus breaks the 7th seal and opens up the next judgment series. So as the 7th seal is broken open, we're suddenly presented with 7 angels holding 7 trumpets. So we're being introduced in the 7th seal. We're now opening up the next judgment series, which is the 7 trumpets. And we're going, wait a minute, trumpets? Okay, awesome. Paul talked to us in 1 Corinthians 15 about the last trumpet, that's the moment where Jesus splits the sky and begins to return and comes to the earth. So we're getting really close. I mean, if we can see the trumpets, we're actually getting real close. It's just that as Jesus opens that 7th seal, and now we're presented with the 7 trumpets, we don't know how much time is going to lapse between each trumpet. We don't know if it's weeks or months. We really have no idea. But Jesus told us this metaphor, right? He gave us the metaphor in Matthew 24 in his own prophecy just before he went to the cross. He said the end times will be like a woman in labor, increasing in pain and increasing in the frequency of those contractions. So the contractions would get more painful as it get closer and closer to delivery, and those contractions would get closer together. They would increase in frequency, and the greater pain and the greater frequency would come as we get closer together. So as we get closer to his return. So we would expect then, as we've seen the seals, and they were dramatic. I mean, a quarter of the earth dies, and so much of the earth is struck in terms of famine, and we have war, and we have so many people dying, and martyrs, being martyred for their faith. I mean, such dramatic things happening. And now as Jesus breaks this 7th seal, the 7 angels with the 7 trumpets are about to create their sound and give their sound. Jesus sees an increase of help coming. It tells us that there's silence in heaven for a half an hour. And I'm just being honest with you, friends, I don't know how to interpret that. I don't know how to state that, but it just says there's silence for a period of time, a half an hour. I don't know what that means, but it just means there's silence, and I'm just taking it as that. Suddenly, heaven is quiet. Suddenly, that throne room scene in Revelation 4 is all quiet, dead silence. No more lightnings, thunderings, and voices, complete silence. So I don't know how to interpret that. Most commentators take a shot at it, but quite honestly, I look at it and I just think, okay, I don't know. I just really don't know. But he goes on and he says, then another angel, verse 3, having a golden censer, came and he stood at the altar. This is the altar of incense. This is reflective of the altar of prayer. He stood at the altar and he was given much incense. So an increase of incense, an increase of prayer. And that he should offer it with the prayers of the saints upon the golden altar which was before the throne. In other words, he is mingling the prayers given to him by God. I'm thinking the prayers that Jesus is praying, and he's mingling it with the prayers of the saints who are on the earth. And it says, and the smoke of the incense with the prayers of the saints ascended before God from the angel's hands. And then the angel took the censer and filled the censer with fire from the altar, and he threw it to the earth. And there were noises, thunderings, lightnings, and a great earthquake. My friends, I believe that as the seventh seal is opened, there's silence in heaven. We're presented with the coming of the next judgment series, the trumpets, but God gives an increase to the prayers of the saints on the earth. I believe this is indicative of, and most commentators would tell us, that God gives an increase to the prayer movement on the earth for the saints who are standing before God, crying out for justice and intercession. And now God throws down upon the earth to the prayers of the saints great power upon their prayers, so that their prayers, as many times we've seen in the history of revival, the prayers that took place in revival had powerful, immediate impact. And so God is helping the prayer movement as we see the seventh seal broken open. There's silence, there's increase of help for the prayer movement, and God is engaging now and about to engage in the trumpet series, the judgments. We begin to see the next phase of the story. Verse 7 presents to us the beginning of the trumpets. Verse 6, he says the seven angels had the trumpets prepared to sound, and now verse 7, here we have the first trumpet. The first angel sounded, verse 7 says, and hail and fire followed, mingled with blood, and they were thrown to the earth, and a third of the trees were burned up, and all green grass was burned up. So my friends, right in the very first sounding of the first angel with the first trumpet, 1/3 of the trees of the earth are burned, and all green grass is burned. So what God is doing is he's attacking the resources of the earth that the Antichrist is using to build and amass and supply his army, to supply his empire. And so God is not attacking his beloved. He's not attacking his people. They are on the earth, but he's attacking the Antichrist and his systems in order to deplete his resources so that he has a hard time. Let's say it that way. He has a very difficult time supplying his army and driving his empire. Oh, my friends, imagine it's just the first trumpet, and this contraction burns 1/3 of the trees. So think of it, the Amazon, this huge jungle of trees that acts like a filter for our earth, to filter out our clean air. The jungles of Africa, think of this, the jungles of Southeast Asia, all of the trees, 1/3, the trees of North America, the forests of North America. Imagine the forests of South America, Africa, all these main areas where all these forests are like natural filters for the air of the earth, and 1/3 of these filters, these natural filters, are burned with fire, and all green grass is burned with fire. Oh, my friends, that is so much smoke in the atmosphere, and no longer are those natural filters, those trees, filtering the air. I mean, the air becomes polluted with smoke. It's difficult to breathe. Oh, my friends, what a difficult moment in time. And this is a strike against the Antichrist and his empire to make life very difficult for him. The second trumpet is sounded, and it tells us that the second angel sounds in verse 8, and something like a great mountain burning with fire is thrown into the sea, and 1/3 of the sea becomes blood. My gosh. And 1/3 of living creatures of the sea die, and 1/3 of the ships are destroyed. So the interaction that man has, the Antichrist who's taken control of the money of the earth, the economy of the earth, and the interaction and the shipping lanes that is moving supplies from one place to another. 1/3 of the ships are destroyed. 1/3 of the seas are destroyed, and they're like blood. They're like, back when we look at the judgments of Egypt, suddenly part of the seas turn to blood. So that means everything within that particular part of the sea, all the life, all the sea animals, they die. I mean, the stench, my friends, the inability to move back and forth. So this strike against the Antichrist and his system again, this challenge, this 1/3 of the seas turn to blood, and the ships are destroyed, and animals and sea creatures are destroyed. It's making life very difficult for the Antichrist, his empire, and his followers. We look at verse 10, chapter 8, verse 10, and we look at the third trumpet. And in the third trumpet, all the fresh water, 1/3 of the fresh water supplies is affected. Now watch this. Then a third angel sounded, and a great star from heaven falls, burning like a torch, and it fell on the 1/3 of the rivers and on the springs of water. The name of the star is wormwood. 1/3 of the waters became wormwood, or bitter, and many men died from the water because it was made bitter. My friends, God is clearly in this trumpet series. I mean, we are seeing 1/3 in these different trumpet blasts. 1/3 of the earth is struck. 1/3 of the seas are struck. 1/3 of the fresh water is struck. The Lord is clearly trying to really make life difficult for the Antichrist. And I want us to notice that in all of this, there is no response from the Antichrist and his systems in terms of repentance. God is redemptive still in this moment. I mean, a lot is happening. My friends, it seems so difficult and challenging, but these trumpets that have been released by God, released by Jesus in the seventh seal, he breaks the seventh seal, now these trumpets are sounding. This is Jesus that has done this. This is such a hard message for us to understand, right? Such a hard message. We need to know the Lord as the judge. We need to be in love with him still, because unless we're in love with him, we'll never understand why he's being so severe. But it's because he died on the cross, and the Father said, no, you can't take the life of my son and not have to answer, this is my chosen servant. He's the one that's going to lead, and stop with all your wickedness. And God is clearly saying to us, no, it's time to deal with this. And so he's dealing with the Antichrist and the wicked, those who follow him in their wickedness. Well, in the fourth trumpet, I mean, it gets even more difficult, my friends. Oh my gosh. Verse 12, the fourth angel sounds, and 1/3 of the sun is struck, the moon and the stars are darkened, 1/3 of the day did not shine, and likewise at night. Imagine how cold it gets, with 1/3 of the sun no longer showing its light. The tides begin to go off kilter, right? Because the moon is the part of the gravitational pull on our earth, and it's what helps us with the tides, right? The way the oceans move and adjust. And suddenly now we have this great challenge. And the Lord says, or there's one in heaven, an angel, verse 13 says, woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth, because of the remaining blasts of the trumpet of the 3 angels who are about to sound. The angel is warning us, here come the last 3 trumpet blasts, and they are 3 different blasts that bring great woe. Well, we'll just with our remaining time, we'll quickly go through. Starting in chapter 9, we have the 5th trumpet, which there is a release of locusts from the bottomless pit. What a dramatic thing. These locusts come out to sting and to torment men. In the 6th trumpet, angels are sent from the Euphrates, and they gather, and they hear this voice, and they says, release the, verse 14, release the 4 angels who are bound at the great river. And they release and they prepare for this army that is coming. And so John sees, look at this, my friends, verse 16. Now the number of the army of the horsemen was 200 million. That's a real number. John sees that this army that's going to come against and fight at Armageddon, that's going to fight against God and fight against Jesus, is number 200 million. My friends, there's never been an army in the history of the earth gathered of this number. This will be a complete coalition of all of the nations of the earth and their armies sent to fight against God. And then it tells us John is overwhelmed. Just with our final minute, John is overwhelmed. And he's just like, Lord, how is this? How are you going to help your people at this time? Look what's happening. There's so much death and there's so much attack, and an army of 200 million. My friends, he heard the number and so recorded it. And in chapter 10, God shows John how his people will be protected and how he will help them, is that he will release a great prophetic movement where God, through his two witnesses, Revelation 10, John is called again. He's recommissioned. He's re-strengthened to prophesy the things that he's seeing. And in Revelation 11, we see these two great witnesses that are prophesying with such power and authority. They're indicative of a global prophetic movement that is giving the people of the earth direction. Don't follow this man, follow this man. His name is Jesus. And God protects his people, and God helps the nations of the earth by calling to them with a powerful prophetic movement to leave their trespasses and sins, stop following the Antichrist, and come and follow Jesus Christ. It's a powerful moment in the history of the earth, and John sees this happening before we get to the seventh trumpet. He sees all this happen, my friends. It's worthy of our study. The Lord bless you. We're going to move on in the next session and look at the return of the Lord, the beginning of the procession of Christ. But the Lord bless you. Stay with it. I know this is tough content, but learn to love the Lord with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. This is one of the ways we do it, is seeing what he has prepared for the future. The Lord bless you. Bye-bye.